We were not taught any type of culture, our own culture, in the school system, because I think it was probably against the law for us to speak our language. We were called devil worshippers, and it caused a tremendous amount of confusion among our people. Pretty much forgot about my language, my way of life, the concepts of our religion, of our spirituality. I really didn't know who I was. I was not a white boy. I was not an Indian because of being ridiculed. So it caused a lot of turmoil in my life. And today I'm very proud to be called a Native American. I'm very proud to be in the field that I am, in a helping field. I know who I am, I know where I came from, and I know where I'm going. The majority of the parents that I encounter at the school system don't speak their language, don't practice their ways, because of the fear that was brought to us. We have to sometimes go into the home system and try to work with the parents also. People coming in and teaching our kids Lakota language, I think it's very helpful to our kids, and I think it's very important for them to learn English, but still maintain their identity as Native American people and keep their language.
My family left Vietnam in 1975 during the peak of the Vietnam War. I had entered preschool. I didn't know any English. I only spoke Vietnamese at home with my parents. I slowly got used to speaking English, especially since I didn't have any Vietnamese friends in my classes. I knew English was very important at that time. Not only because my teachers pushed English so hard, but because it tied into being an American, which was placed very high in importance. In 4th grade, I transferred schools, and that was when things started to get really rocky. I was made fun of, not from people who disliked me, but actually from friends. That was when I really started to dislike speaking in Vietnamese. I hardly talked to my parents when I was growing up because they would want me to speak in Vietnamese, and I just couldn't, and so we just stopped talking. Today, I haven't talked to my grandparents in almost a year. I see them like at holidays, and of course, like I hug my grandmother hello, and I bow hello, which is jiao ba, and that's the extent to it. For instance, recently my grandfather was in the hospital, and I still haven't visited him, and I wouldn't know what to say to him because I can't find the words to express myself to him. And that's pretty much the way I feel with my parents most of the time too. I just don't have the words to express myself with them. When I was a kid, it was like I hugged them all the time, I kissed them goodbye. And now it's like, I don't know, I can't explain it. Now it's like they're my parents, but like I haven't said I love you since, I don't know, since I was 8 or 9. That I just wish that I knew Vietnamese so that I could talk to them more and relate to them more.
Ours is a nation whose people reflect many languages and cultures. And while generations of immigrants have come to learn English, many were encouraged to shed their home language and culture in order to succeed in society, a price that did not guarantee attainment of the mythical American dream. Today, many educators know that children can become truly bilingual, able to use 2 languages with equal fluency. They also know that children, families, schools, and communities suffer when children lose their connection to their language and heritage. Aware of the past and involved in shaping the future, early childhood teachers ask, how can we help children become bilingual learners? How can we help children continue to develop their home language? How can we help young children add English as a second language for success in school and life? It is not a simple goal that guides our teaching. Children will learn English and at the same time will develop greater fluency in their home language. Why both? Because fluency in home language greatly impacts literacy skills in both languages.
Home language is vital to development and learning, and it's also vital to a child's self-identity and self-esteem, and also to his language later, his or her later bilingual language skills.
It's important for early child education to re-engage in understanding the importance of those roots, because that's what development essentially is continuous, and kids begin to develop early on and they continue, including through our services to them as early child educators. In addition to that, one of the responsibilities we have is to take them beyond where they are, to give them the wings, as my mother would say to me. We not only want you to be a good human being, but we want you to be someone who can be very successful in the society in which we live. That requires good English acquisition, that requires certain kinds of literacy skills, etc. As early child educators, we need to understand that we're taking kids and recognizing their roots and then giving them the kinds of wings that they need developmentally to not only be successful in the time we have them, but successful in other pursuits that they will have in the formal educational system when they get older and as adults.
Throughout history, there has been little doubt that learning English is a worthy objective, but the importance of continuing to develop home language is often debated. The picture is only now becoming clear. Ongoing development of home language carries meaning far beyond the child's immediate situation.
We conducted a study interviewing 1,100 families. 64% of these families who had had children in English-only preschools would communicate with their parents primarily in English. In time, these families reported that their children lost their native language, with the consequence that those families who could not speak English very well were left unable to communicate easily with their children.
They need to be aware that the consequences of children being exposed to English, being exposed to the culture of the school and society that the family lives in, at an age that before the home culture, the home language is pretty firmly planted in the child's life. That they need to know that there are consequences, and the consequences sometimes and very often is for children to shift their loyalties to the new language, to the new culture, and therefore become different from their families.
One of the things that we are worrying quite a good deal about right now is at what age we should be introducing English to children whose home language is something other than English. There is no question that linguistically, young children can learn to speak 1, 2, 3, probably 4 or 5 different languages without any major problem at all, as long as they live in language communities in which those languages are used. So then, why don't we just immediately start children on English and not worry about giving them their first instruction in their home language? And the answer to that is that languages are not just linguistic arrangements, they're also socio-political statements. And when we say to some children, your language is not used in our schools are high status and your language is not, then we also say something to them about their own status.
We now know children best develop language skills in caring one-on-one relationships with someone who speaks the language. These relationships lead to frequent exchanges of ideas where children know they will be understood.
You're so big. Kids learn language out of relationship. It's not that kids understand academically, now I'm speaking English, now I'm speaking Chinese, or I'm speaking Spanish. It's I know what to speak to engage this adult who was a meaningful relationship. My mother, my father, my grandmother. That's how I know the words that I'm supposed to use. And I know which environments I should use which words.
The issue when it comes to language is that what we've learned in our research, and certainly research around the world, is that language is something that's very difficult to be taught. Children develop languages, and what we do is we set up occasions, environments in which language development can be enhanced, nurtured, supported.
I encourage them to use the language that it's taken them 4 years to learn. You know, it's their only means of communication, and I encourage that. Learning a second language is very easy for young children. But more than that, I think the ability for children to really interact during free play time, they do it more than I do. The English-speaking children modeling and the child having that need to communicate with the English-speaking child, I think it's really children interacting with their English-speaking peers that really develops a lot of language, because it's that need, that necessity to communicate.
We have a little boy named Albert, and who had recently just learned English coming into our room. And he started interacting with a lot of the children, but he didn't know how to interact with them at first because English, of course, is his second language. And the children would tease him at first because he didn't know how to interact with them, and he would say things in his language that they didn't understand. So we tried to encourage Albert through different ways. Like, for example, today, he feels so proud when he builds things like that, like the bridge or a big tower or castle. And the children start talking to him in English, and he'll respond. He'll try to talk to them back in English. And that's how his interaction is with them, by feeling good about doing something that he's good at. And we encourage that with him, like in the building the blocks.
Teachers of bilingual children often use a variety of symbols, from objects to pictures to sounds, to help the child connect with the content. Teacher Terry Rosegrant looks to her content-rich curriculum to spark new vocabulary and language skill. In her public school classroom, 3/4 of the children this year came speaking little or no English.
Good for me. I know you are good for me.
Actually, I think one of the things that has changed in education that has really provided us with an opportunity to be more successful with children who speak English as their second language is that our curriculum, particularly in Arlington County where I teach, is content-driven. The advantage of that for children is that the content is so thick and the terminology fits together more. There's a science to this, there's a mathematics to it, there's a social science to it. It's tied together with some kind of theme or unit of study, richer in terms of the repetition, richer in terms of the connectedness of the meanings.
But the one thing I want to point out is that although 0 to 3 is optimal for language development, that development is continuous, and that we need to support opportunities for development of communication, and language is a piece of that, but is only about half of what someone uses to communicate. So during that optimal period and later in the early childhood years, we're also giving children different opportunities to develop this communicative repertoire, which includes phonology, morphology, syntax, the things we normally think of language, but all the other things as related to when you talk to people, when you say some things, who you talk to, all those things are all part of the communicative package. Good developmentally appropriate practices help children nurture and support the development of that understanding of the communicative system.
Close relationships between teachers and families support the bilingual child's efforts to add English while still developing the home language.
Well, let me tell you about May May. her father and mother brought her from Beijing to the United States when the father became a graduate student at an American university. And the parents sent Mei Mei to preschool. She was just 4.5 at the time. She went to preschool, and before she knew it, she was speaking English and preferring it at home. And after a time, the child spoke only English. Mother spoke only Chinese because she was much slower in learning English than the child was. And after a time, the child could not understand the mother. The mother would ask her to do things the child didn't understand. She would cry when the mother spoke to her, saying, "It's too hard, do it in English. English is easier, English is better."
The question of the optimal time for young children to add a language, to be exposed to a different culture, is something that parents have to decide. What I would say to teachers who are inclined to tell parents that they should speak in English at home to their children to help them learn English better, that really interferes with the parent and child relationship, especially when the parents don't speak English well. So I would encourage teachers to talk to parents, to tell them, you really must continue socializing your children in the language, in the culture of the home. You need to prepare them for school, but the preparation is really in guiding them in work habits that are consistent with the expectations of the school, with a positive outlook towards school and the things they're going to be learning at school. These are things that parents can do and that teachers ought to be advising parents to do at home, but in language that the parents really command fluently.
If the teacher only speaks English, it's important for people who speak the languages of the children to come into the center, even if they're not teachers. That can be done through parent involvement, that can be done through volunteers, that can be done in a number of ways if everyone is dedicated to the importance of preserving home language.
The main thing, I think, for a child who doesn't speak English, they feel very uncomfortable because they don't know how to communicate with us. What we try to do is ask parents how we can make them feel comfortable as far as when we speak to them. Are there words that we can use in their language to help them be comfortable?
What happens, though, with some children in the home where the mother speaks one language and the father speaks the other, I encourage the parents to be role model in just one language. For example, I'll say to the mom, if you're stronger in Spanish, speak to the child only in Spanish. And the father, if you're stronger in English, speak to the child only in English. Don't mix.
The other issues are that kids, when they're young and if they're learning two languages, sometimes what happens is they can start mixing the two. But if you have good adult role modeling of how you use language, kids sort it out. They may be quiet for a little bit. That shouldn't be confused with a developmental disability.
We ourselves need to provide kinds of environments that allow families and other caretakers, because in many of these families, parents may not be the primary caretaker. So you've got to make people welcome into the environment. Make sure they know that if you can't speak the language and you may not know much about them, one, you're willing to learn and do everything you can. You're willing to try to understand the kinds of developmental circumstances that their children are in, and then find kinds of resources that might be available that you yourself may not be able to provide. Someone from the community who speaks Urdu, someone in the community who speaks Russian, you may not. But bottom line is that good developmental practices do everything they can to understand and make the environment aligned with the kinds of developmental circumstances that occur outside the setting.
Teaching English and supporting development of the home language. a strategy for helping children be successful in all areas of their lives.